ball rolling tonight. Starting on the agenda, looks like Hoctor is up first.
Thank you very much for having me out tonight. I apologize I wasn't able to make the last meeting, but I wanted to go ahead and explain to you what the Forensic Investigations Council is and why I go, and a little bit about why it's important. In our state, there's a coroner that's assigned to the council, a defense attorney, a prosecutor, and because I'm a coroner and a prosecutor, I have a seat on the board and represent that population of our state as well. We have had probably the most work on the Forensic Investigations Council in the last 3 years that we've ever had, due to the legalization of marijuana. When the marijuana law was first passed, it had a definition that made it impossible for us to test marijuana. We work with the chemists for the Washington State Patrol on how do we test it. Before, we do have some cops here, you were able to put marijuana into a little container, shake it, and if it turned a color, it had marijuana. And it was really simple. We were able to identify it, test it, and prosecute. After we passed 502, we had a little bit different definition, and it was quantitative. So our labs had to analyze it. End result, it was about $70,000 to do one test. So we had a problem. We had to look at it and we had to decide, what are we doing as prosecutors? Can we even prosecute these cases? It resulted in a lot of dismissals of possession of marijuana. It resulted in prosecutors saying, okay, is it okay for us to take this case when we know we can't prove it? And we looked at the chemists, and even after the $70,000 was spent on marijuana testing, we had them sit down before us and say, okay, is it marijuana? And they told us, well, even after the test, we can tell you it probably is, but we can't tell you for sure based on your definition of marijuana. So we have a really excellent lobbyist that lobbies for Washington State Association of Prosecuting Attorneys, and he was able to get a fix midterm in 2013 to correct that definition of marijuana. We were able to get it so that we have a definition that's workable. It's still difficult to test. It's not as simple as the testing that we used to do. We're also facing edibles. And you guys might have heard about this. This involves oils, butters, baked goods. So we face this problem as prosecutors when we talk to our cops. How do you arrest these people? What do you have for probable cause? If you see someone eating a chocolate brownie, how do you know it's marijuana? Before we had this easy way, it smelled bad. You could smell marijuana, they were smoking it, if kids were smelling it, it was on your clothes, in your room. When officers stopped people, they could smell it. So now we just have a whole bunch of problems that have been opened up with it. Whether you're for marijuana or against marijuana, the enforcement of marijuana is now quite difficult. The other thing that we're facing in Washington State is our breathalyzer test, referred to as a BAC. And you can go in and the officers take you into the station and we can give you a reading on what your blood alcohol level is through your breath. Now we're switching that to what's called a Draeger system. Some counties have it, some counties don't. As we do the rollout, we're talking about testing, validation, how we're going to get it in all of the counties. So those are just some of the things that we do at the FIC Council. The other part that we have at the FIC Council, as you're aware, we had the mudslide on the west side. And so it's part of my role. I'm prosecutor on one hat, coroner on the other hat. And we meet as coroners because that same council is what handles all of our testing for DNA. They handle all of our identification of bodies. If we have someone that we don't know who they are, we use dental records to identify that body. And so we were also meeting to roundtable what went right in the mudslide and what went wrong. And in the event we had a catastrophe here in Klickitat County, how can I bring that back and how can we do it better? We're working with a group of very dedicated individuals in Klickitat County to set up mass fatality planning. Should that need arise, what do we still have, what resources do we need to set up? So that's a little bit why I felt that it's important to go to that meeting, and it's why I leave Klickitat County to go up to that meeting Now back to, I took office about 3.5 years ago, and I promised 3 things: to reduce outsourcing, to restore victim confidentiality, and to increase conviction rates. I started out with simple goals because I knew they were going to be massive in time, and I took an office and I completely restructured that office. I knew that we had work to be done, but I wanted to make something that was doable, and my first goal, reducing the outsourcing, was a huge task. Prior to my administration, we outsourced most of our felony work for big trial cases, and we outsourced all of our court appeals cases. That means we hired an attorney to do all of the appeals work for us. So what I did, first off, we brought all that in-house. We also, with the treasurer's office and other elected officials, what they would do is they'd pick up the phone and they'd call their own civil attorney. They'd call an attorney that they liked or that they knew because they weren't getting solid advice from the prosecuting attorney's office. And it wasn't that I disliked those attorneys, but we're using taxpayer money to do it, and that's what my office is for. My office is to provide civil advice to my elected officials, provide criminal advice and prosecution, and to do the coroner portion of the job. And so we brought that in-house, saving roughly $100,000 a year. The elected officials quantifying that a little bit more difficult because they were using their own budgets to do it. But I thought it was important. That was something that I promised, and that was the first thing that I did when I took office. Then, as we brought the appeals in and training people, the next step was to make sure that I had qualified individuals in my office. Right now, I think, a little bit prejudiced, that we have the most qualified and competent prosecuting attorneys that we've ever had in Clicktack County. We have 2 people handling federal felonies, both one with 23 years of experience, one with 24 years of experience. They are doing an excellent job. And some people say, well, you're the prosecuting attorney, you do everything. That is not realistic. I attend the boards, I make sure that things are functioning, I do the hiring, I do the civil opinion requests. So the civil work is what I do. I also represent us in lawsuits. You may have heard of public records requests. That's a new thing that we're facing in counties, and it ends up in hundreds of thousands of dollars in taxpayer money being paid out in suits. And so it's something that we dedicate a lot of time to in our own office because it's very important. We also had issues when I came in with working with the tribe. And we had a lot of litigation and lawsuits that came from an inability to work closely with the tribe. So I do spend a lot of time working with tribal police, the tribal council, to ensure that we have a strong working relationship. One of the issues that we got sued very often on was the fact that we would have a fatality, and on tribal land and Indian land, they have jurisdiction on it. So we would go out as coroner, our officers would respond, and it wasn't, they thought we did anything wrong, but I think out of the miscommunication and lack of respect, so it ended litigation. We've cured that, we haven't had any lawsuits on our coroner or our criminal prosecution front since taking office. I had pending lawsuits that we took care of when I came in. We also had a huge backlog of cases, including 3 behavioral homicide cases when I took office. We were able to try those and take care of them. Another thing is we're talking a lot about stats in this case, or I think in my race in particular. There was a ruling, it was called Bone Club, and it sent us back 3 cases. They were from 2004, 2005, a murder case, and 2 sexual assault cases. They had to be tried as if it was the first time they were tried. We tried one of those cases, it resulted in a conviction, a rape of a young girl. But it was an interesting case to try because we couldn't tell the jury why it took us so long to bring it to trial. She was an adult then. And it also skews the stats because it looks like it's been sitting there since 2004 and we never resolved it. But when things are challenged on appeal, they come back and we're tried. So overall, we're working in all levels of the office, from the coroner to the prosecutor component to the civil component, to work with our elected officials, work with our officers, and those officers are city officers, county officers, Park and Recs officers, Washington State Patrol officers. At times, I don't think there's always agreement on everything, but I think that I have extremely professional attorneys. The other thing is that all of my attorneys, we have an attorney on call 24 hours a day, 7 days a week. So it's not uncommon for me to be called at 2 in the morning, 3 in the morning. and we take a rotation on that. Also, we're always open in the office for people to come in, ask questions. There are times when we are a little bit busy because of other things going on, but officers have never had to wait more than a couple of minutes to get with an attorney. We make that a priority because we know those cases are important. I will conclude because I know there's two other gentlemen that are very anxious to talk, but I would love to take any questions should anyone have any for me.
How is Colorado dealing with the marijuana situation? Have you been in communication with them on how things are done there?
We are a little bit. We're looking at what's going wrong in Colorado a little bit. The biggest concern that we're looking at is this edible situation. Our commissioners in particular are looking at it because that's where we're seeing young kids getting a hold of brownies, young kids getting a hold of edibles. We've had a fatality, we've had some ER trips. Because unlike alcohol where your kids might get a hold of it, it tastes bad. They're not going to just chow down on like they would a chocolate brownie or a cookie. They're also popular in Tootsie Roll forms that we're seeing. So we're really looking to them as an example on how did they do it and what can we do as a fix. We're new. I know Marc's Pot Shop just opened in White Salmon. That's our first. There's 2 pending permits still for that area for stores, so our growers. I know the state is really excited, hoping to bring in a lot of revenue. One of the things that at the Prosecutors Association meeting that I was just at, we were informed that the state is doing budget cuts of 50% across every department. So I think they're really hinging on this hope that marijuana is going to be the savior and the tax revenue is going to help us. I'm not sure if that's the case. I'm not really thinking so, although on the positive side, I hope it brings revenue so that we can aid in other parts of law enforcement, but I'm just not sure. So, anything else? Yes.
I was interested in your talk about the testing for marijuana. I've been curious with alcohol, there's the breathalyzer and there's the concentration in your blood. So how is there a standard for intoxication from marijuana, and how is it tested, and is that standard useful to convict somebody?
Well, for our DUIs and things, our DUIs we have good officers and they're trained well, so when they observe erratic driving and they pull somebody over, they can do field sobriety tests, and if they think they're impaired, we can get a search warrant for their blood. And that's how we test for marijuana. It's 5 nanograms or over is the legal limit, just like 0.08 is our legal limit for alcohol. We do a blood test. The problem that we have with it, however, is that after 2 hours, we really don't have a sample that we can use. And in our county, from West End to East End, even if our officers do it as fast as they can, 2 hours isn't always sufficient time to get a blood test and get it to the hospital, or get into the hospital for a blood test. The other issue that we have, unlike alcohol where you can extrapolate, so you can say that if you drank at 5 o'clock and you had 0.15 blood alcohol, we can go back and see what yours would have been at 6 o'clock, or what it would have been at 12 that day, if you had still been drinking. We aren't able to do that with marijuana. Our chemists are working to try to do that. What we used to learn a lot about marijuana and the effects in the blood, we do what are called wet labs. And you get people drunk, and you test them after 1 drink, 2 drinks, 3 drinks. Because marijuana hasn't been legal, we haven't been doing wet labs for... But now I suspect, and they're already talking about it, they're going to get people high, and they're going to look at it and say, after 1 hit, 2 hits, 3 hits. The other thing facing us on marijuana is it'll affect you differently, and you differently, and you differently. There's not a standard effect in marijuana. So it's really hard when you're trying to say this person had 2 drinks or 3 drinks. So we've got that 5 nanogram set for your blood result, but there's still a lot of things that we need to work on. I hope that answers your question.
Lori, since the state required you to do the testing, can't you bill the state for the cost of the test, $7,000?
The state doesn't require the testing. We the prosecution requires the testing, because we have to prove that it's marijuana if we're going to charge it, if we're going to succeed in prosecution of the case. They do the testing for us, and they don't charge us for that $70,000, but the problem is all across the state we're using those same labs. So we have to talk to each other and say, okay, where are resources? Because it's just like tax money, there's so much money, and if you take this amount for these people, it leaves less for everybody else. So it's really working on how can we best use it.
Just out of curiosity, I mean, that seems like a lot of money for testing.
Yes.
And I don't know how you're doing it as a prosecutor, but for me, I just would assume that it wouldn't even be worth prosecuting any marijuana cases.
In 2013, that's basically what we did. We didn't prosecute marijuana cases. A lot were thrown out. Anything under 40 grams was thrown out because we legalized it a little bit less than that, but I wasn't going to weigh it out and do that testing. I didn't feel that it was the best use of funds for our county or for the state. And so those did get thrown out. Electrochromography is a huge machine that they have. Electrochromatography, I think is the correct word. And we've purchased those. I think we have 3 in the state now, with grant money that supposedly is supposed to come from the revenues that we're going, they kind of borrowed against the revenues they're hoping to get from the marijuana, to get the machines to test for the marijuana. But we brought it down because these machines can test the quantity of THC in the brownies, whatever we give them to test. And we're working with it too, because right now, when I was last there, the chemists in the lab are testing food, because most of the food is baked with a butter and it's infused with oil, and that's how they're making their brownies and candies and things like that. So when you go into the lab, it's funny because they've got candy and Rolos and brownies and all kinds of things, and they're using those test samples to see how can we quantify the THC in these items.
So the active ingredient that you tested is THC?
Yes.
Another quick question on marijuana. I know a gentleman, I think gentleman out in Snowden, that I won't give him what name, but anyway, he's got a medical thing. Is the medical side changed at all?
The legislature didn't address the medical. So you can grow 15 plants, you can have 3 grows growing, so you can have a total of 45 if you're growing for 2 other people. I think they're going to find that they're going to need to address the medical, because right now there's huge tax penalties if you're growing and manufacturing for those stores. Yet on the medical side, it's very easy to get a card. I think our cops and sheriffs here with us today can attest that cards are not hard to get. We see them with very healthy 21-year-olds, 23-year-olds. Everybody's got a headache or a backache, asthma. So getting that card allows you to grow, and then you tell people, I traded it. So you didn't make money off of it, but you can grow all those plants and it's still in the marketplace. And my concern is I don't know how they're going, they tell us that they're going to because they can source all the marijuana. But if you have a brownie with marijuana in it, I'm not sure how you can tell that that was a grower that paid taxes on it versus the medical grower that paid no taxes on it. So I think there's a lot of holes in what they're trying to do. Anything else I can answer for anyone?
I have a question.
Yes.
So one of the things that is being said about the office is that there's continuances. Can you explain what the continuances are?
Continuances are granted when we go to trial, there's defense and prosecution. If the defense is not prepared, they can't find a witness, if they need more time, they get a continuance. And the judges are very, very hesitant to ever deny a continuance for the defense, simply because it often results in an appeal. If we go forward and convict that person, they can appeal it saying that ineffective assistance of counsel, they didn't get a fair trial because their attorney was unprepared. So it's a balancing test. We want to be careful not to deny defense counsel requests when they're legitimate. We also balance that with victims' rights. We balance it with officer schedules who are on vacation a lot, who are at trainings. We have a small police force, and so when I take 10 of them out for hearings or 3 of them out for trials, it does burden everyone, but making sure that everyone's schedule fits so that we can get them there. But most of the time it has to do with defense and preparation for trials.
do you personally yourself have to do the prosecuting?
The prosecuting of the standing up in trial? No. We have an office, there's 4 of us in the office. I have 2 criminal prosecutors that do handle criminal. Brian Aaron, 23 years, I apologize, of criminal prosecution. He can't do civil work. Civil is not his area of expertise, so he does not handle that. Kate does a little civil, but mostly I do the civil litigation in the office, and the coroner piece as well. I do chargings, reviewing of evidence, interviewing witnesses. It's just a matter of spreading time. Trials are fun. I do enjoy doing them, but there's other places that I need it in the office, and we do have some prosecutors across the state that's what they do. They wait for the big juicy trial and then they take it over from their deputies and take it, because that's the fun part for a lot of people, but it's not the work part that needs to always be done in my office.
So you're primarily the head of the department, the others do work under your instruction.
The criminal prosecution part, that's not, I'm in there working, doing stacks of civil litigation opinion requests. So what'll happen is someone will have a question like on marijuana, or recently the commissioners wanted to know, Lori, we want to ban edibles in our county. How do we do it? So that entails me, and sometimes those research requests can take me a couple of hours, sometimes they take me a week of research to give them a good handle on what they're asking. I represent our assessor in taxico cases, and I have clients that I don't agree with them all the time. I don't have to agree with them, but I represent their interests. So right now, our assessor has appeals that are going on, I represent her in those. PRA cases we're getting, the county is named as a defendant in those cases. I handle those cases. So there's a whole, I think sometimes people assume that we're a prosecutor's office and that's all we do. But there's a lot more to the office and what makes it run than that piece. And unfortunately, the civil component is where we expose the county to a lot of liability. It's also where if we were to outsource those, we're looking at between $500 and $700 an hour for an attorney that we're going to bring in. So that's where we really see the savings, and we're open to the most liability. So that's the part that I take for my staff. Thank you. Anything else I can?
All right, thank you for that. If I could have the 2 sheriff's candidates come up here. Just a couple of things. If you guys want to come up here and sit down at the table. At this time, since it's 95 degrees outside, I would invite both of you to make yourselves comfortable while you're here. Just so you know, there's no requirement to stand during the answers. Each candidate will have 10 minutes to give their presentation, followed by questions from the audience. We'll go alphabetically. We'll start with Marc.
So are you going to give over the mic?
Go ahead.
Good evening. Thank you, Sharon, for giving us a shot here in front of your community. It is an honor to have the opportunity to address these folks because you are the Republican Party, and we have a lot of the same values, family, any type of faith and physical conservatism. I think there are some of the things that we all see embraced within the Republican Party. About myself and my wife, born and raised in the state of Washington, beauty center, native of Washington. So I've lived here for 19 years. My wife and I have been married 32 years, and we have 7 children. 5 children, 7 grandchildren. Recently, my 4th child graduated from Boardman High School, valedictorian in his class. About my professional background. I was a Washington State Trooper for 28 years. I served in the State Patrol in a number of different functions. My specialty over the years was in the field of collision investigation, specifically collision reconstruction. I was also on the SWAT team for a few years. Also was a marijuana lead technician at this day and age. Also served on the Washington State's Collision Investigation Committee for 10 years. I was a drug recognition expert for about 9 years and served in that capacity. So it was a pretty broad spectrum of responsibilities that I held when I was with the State Patrol. My emphasis since taking office here as the undersheriff has been to provide professionalism and integrity and service. And that's, of course, done through my personnel in the delivering of the services to the public. I've done this through establishing 5 objectives of my staff. And those 5 objectives are improving accountability, communication, safety, training, and technology. So you'll find that just about all of the efforts and the accomplishments that I have achieved in the last year, been here 12 months now, they fall into one of those 5 categories. To build my skills as an administrator, which is, of course, what the role is as the undersheriff, is to akin to an operations manager in business. If you were going to compare the role of the sheriff and the undersheriff, for those that are not as familiar in the sheriff's office, the undersheriff would be an operations manager in a corporation, and the sheriff would be like the CEO. He's responsible for making sure that the shareholders are taken care of and that the company is addressing what their priorities are. And then the operations manager, akin to what I do as the undersheriff, is to make sure that the civil and the patrol and the jail division are all in compliance with the various regulations laid down by the state and federal government, and to make sure that there's accountability throughout the operations and efficiencies. As the administrator, what I've done to improve my skills and to garner more training specifically for that administrative role, I've gone back to first-line supervisor schools just this last year. I've taken it before. I went back to make sure that I was in tune with what is being taught to my supervisors. So I'm in tune with them and not working at cross purposes. I've also attended middle management training. All this is done through the Criminal Justice Training Commission, the standards for law enforcement supervision up in hearing. In addition to that, I also completed the Rural Executive Management Institute's school for law enforcement executives. Furthermore, as a member of WASPIC, which is the Washington Association of Sheriffs and Police Chiefs, I've also networked with a number of these sheriffs that are sitting and have a great deal of experience in the role that I am in. And they've been able to give me pointers, and I consult as far as the best practices and procedures that they've found in terms of question advices. Past year, I've learned a great deal about how different the role of the sheriff is in contrast to the Washington State Patrol, where I served for 28 years. The role is entirely different because the mission is different. When I was with the Washington State Patrol, I was largely an enforcement-oriented officer. In the sheriff's office, it's a lot more about problem solving, particularly the role of the undersheriff. But it flows right down to the number of excellent deputies that I have, because what they're sent out to do when they respond to a call is solve problems. It can be a domestic, it could be a burglary, whatever the type of call is. That's their function, is to bring resolution. So through communication with the victim or the suspect at the time, they're able to make that correct decision on the scene. I've been able to draw on my 28 years with the State Patrol and the continuous training they afforded me right up until June of last year when I retired. The role that I had before, I would say I was selling safety. Now my role is a bit broader. It's more of a selling a quality of life. Over my career with Washington State Patrol further, I did receive a number of commendations and awards for various things that I did. The relevance of that to you and to me as a undersheriff is that I think it pretty well demonstrates my commitment to excellence and my desire to serve. As you're, let me shift gears here. Reducing crime is largely related to drug addiction. We talked about marijuana here earlier. That's not the only drug out there. Obviously, it's much broader than that. But in order to have a comprehensive approach to dealing with that crime, we have to have prevention, diversion, and successful prosecution. Prosecution is going to be turned over to the prosecutor's office, but I can aid, and my deputies can aid the prosecutor's office by putting forth quality and comprehensive reports to make their job easier and give them more leverage for whatever means are available at their disposal for disposing of the case, whether it be through a plea or through taking it all the way to a trial. I'd just like to close with the fact that I am the only candidate for sheriff who is certified Washington State Peace Officer. And as your sheriff, I will ensure that all of my deputies are also certified, and currently they are. We just went through the process of certifying 2 more that are scheduled to go to the academy in September 3rd. I've been your undersheriff since last July, and when I'm elected sheriff, I will continue to focus on the same 5 objectives that I have so far this last year. Thank you.
I see some familiar faces out there. Anyway, Chairman, thank you, as Marc indicated, for allowing us to be here this evening. I appreciate that very much. I have this opportunity. My wife, Frances, is here. Mainstay of support. We also have grandchildren and family in the area, and buying a home in the Clickitat County. So we got to work together as well. Give you a little background on myself. I have over 40 years in law enforcement. You might ask yourself, I was an old guy working for sheriff. Well, one, I love serving the public. I've been doing it a little over 40 years. And I believe that with that age and experience, you get experience and wisdom because of that age. And Marc makes some very good points. As I indicated, I started out my law enforcement with the Clark County Sheriff's Office in 1970. I spent 20 and a half years with the Sheriff's Office in Vancouver, Washington. Started out as a deputy sheriff, promoted into detectives, worked property crimes, homicides, sexual assault cases, narcotic cases, promoted to sergeant, served as a patrol sergeant on the road, later transferred as sergeant in charge of narcotic advisory. Did that for a while, and then I was promoted into manager, chief civil deputy, handling civil processing, foreclosures, and so forth in the sheriff's budget. Later promoted to chief criminal deputy. I was over the operations of the department, patrol division, detective division, narcotic and vice division, and overseer of the narcotic and clerks division of narcotic task force. Then I was promoted to undersheriff. For the last 6.5 years, I was with Marc County Sheriff's Office. I was responsible to the sheriff for 281 employees, $14 million budget, and a 350-bed jail facility. That's an awesome responsibility, and I enjoyed doing the job. I left there in 1990, and later was police chief in Elko, Nevada. Spent 4 years in Elko, and in that position as police chief, I had 52 employees, $3.2 million budget. And didn't have a jail, of course, but we had a municipal airport. So I got involved in that as well, for security up there. I left there and later became, after I left Elko, after 4 years as police chief, they got a new mayor, they got a new chief. That's how that works. I left there and went to back to Vancouver, Washington, and started a private investigation business. And that went pretty good until I got a call from my former city manager in Elko, Nevada. And he said, Judge James wanted me to come to work for him as his armed bailiff. So I did. Went back to Elko and worked with Judge James for almost 20 months. He was retiring and moved to Hawaii, so I retired and we moved to Clickitat County. We didn't want to go back on the west side. We've gotten used to the drier climate. Didn't care for all the rain and the traffic. I got bored after 2 months and decided I wanted to go back to work, so I joined the reserves, Clickitat County Sheriff's Office. In April of 2000, I hired on as a range timber deputy, contract job, as an independent contractor. And did that job for 13 years for Clickitat County until January 10th of this year, at which time the contract was terminated. The reason I tell you this, it kind of gives you an overview of my experience. My academies, I have the Washington Basic Law Enforcement Academy, the Nevada Law Enforcement Academy certification, and graduated from the FBI National Academy, Freeman Academy, Quantico, Virginia. I might add, in order to go to that academy, you have to be a sergeant or above. Primarily deals with management issues, constitutional laws. My education background is a 2-year associate applied science degree in administration and justice from Clark Community College. Bachelor's degree from the University of Portland, Oregon, and a master's degree in criminal justice from the University of Portland, Oregon. And I had the pleasure of teaching part-time at Clark College in the administration and justice class for Bob Hunter at that time. He was the administrator over there. So my experience in law enforcement goes back over 40-some years. You know, the thing that I'm most proud of, not only have I got a lot of support from citizens here in Clickitat County for the job of sheriff, but the first time in Clickitat County's history, Sheriff's Department employees, union member employees, that's sergeants, deputies, jailers, billboard operators, 911 dispatchers, administrative staff, not the management, but clerks, members of the Goldendale Police Department, the entire department except for the police chief, which is not allowed in yours, or is administrative, and Benjamin Lake Salem Police Department. They've all come out and endorsed me. They know both myself and my opponent. And these are people, I would stress, that live in this county, that have kids going to school in this county, that are buying homes in this county, and that serve you folks day in and day out in the law enforcement business. They're not from outside the county. They're people that deal in this county every day. And they give me their support to be their sheriff. I'm proud of that. Feel humbled to have that support. So with that background, 14 and a half years in top management, I have been there and I've done the job. I've had to do union contracts, labor relations. I've hired people and had to fire people. It's not an enjoyable position. When you're in management, you're subject to liability issues constantly. But if you're afraid of taking risk, liability is an overwhelming concern to you. And I had an attorney tell me one time, a liability attorney. He said he was asked to teach a class of new deputies on how not to get sued. You know what he told them? Get in a different line of work. Because you're going to get sued. Potential is there. So, with that, I'd just close and say that, again, I appreciate the opportunity to come here tonight and talk to you. I request your vote in the primary election on August 5th for sheriff and November 4th. Thank you very much.
Questions from the audience? I know somebody's got to have a question. This one.
I have to address the both, or can I address one?
Address the one.
Okay. Mr. Song, what is your plan to change the current salary? Or just your, what is your vision of the sheriff's department? Your
Good question. I appreciate you asking that. I didn't get that covered when I was talking. One of the major things I'm doing personally when I'm doing as your sheriff, I'll be quite honest with you, I feel there's too many managers. We don't have enough officers on the street. And what I'll do is flatten out the command. I'll use the salary of at least one, maybe two of those positions to put more deputies out on the road in an overtime capacity. In other words, if there's two deputies working the shift, the sergeant would have the authority to go down the list that the union provided and call out two more officers to work that shift. I'd like to see a minimum of 4 officers on a given shift, which would be a central, east, west, and a rural office for the county. That creates a safer conditions for the citizens, for the 911 calls, quicker response time, and it creates safer conditions for the officers themselves. The other area I'm looking at as a sheriff, I believe in community policing programs, and one of the things I'll do in order to establish that community policing program, I will surround myself with an advisory board of citizens throughout the county, respected citizens from each, like, for example, Clickitat, Clintonwood, White Sand, Benjamin, Bickleton, Goldendale. Those communities are set on this advisory board. Keep in mind, the buck stops with the sheriff, but it would be a transparent budget. In other words, they'll know what we're spending our money on, they'll know what our requests are, they'll know our manpower structure, they'll know our equipment, and when I put a budget together, it'll be with their advice put into that, so they have input into the budget process. So when I go to the Board of County Commissioners, it's just not the sheriff going to them with the wishes. There's some foundation behind that request. Whatever that request might be, whether it's for more equipment, might be more manpower, whatever that might be. I'm looking at establishing several community policing programs, which are volunteer, won't cost the county very little money, if any, in some of these situations, which is sheriff's posse. I know some people kind of smile when I say sheriff's posse, but they used to have a sheriff's posse in this county. And that'd be people that are into horses, backcountry horse people, cattlemen, ranchers. Obviously, they go through a background check and they go through some form of training, but I see it as a rural crime prevention group. Not only helping in crime prevention in rural areas of the county, but I see it as search and rescue as well. I have a gentleman who's willing to volunteer his aircraft, his time and cost. We need to pay for the gas fund. And he could be part of that sheriff's policy on the aircraft portion of it. And that individual would assist us if we're looking for suspects, would assist in the timber patrol areas in the county, range timber patrol areas, and could also, under the right conditions, assist search and rescue. So those are some of the things I'm looking at and changing in the department. As far as the well goes, I'm a very strong believer in the participatory management style. I believe that the employees have a dog in the hunt. They're going to be more supportive of the department, of their job, treat employees with respect, provide them the training, allow them to do the job, hold them accountable for doing the job, do not micromanage them, award it in public, reward it in public, and if you have to discipline in private.
Mark, you want to take a minute or two to respond, or can you, you're not obligated?
Really covered an awful lot of ground there, so I'll try to
Thank you.
cover back some of those points. The point about putting people on overtime based on consuming the salary of one or two administrators really doesn't work because the numbers don't add up. You're putting people to work at time and a half pay, and that consumes that one salary quite rapidly. And there isn't a great deal of difference in the salary between the chiefs, for example, and the sergeants, because the chiefs have not received any kind of pay raise in a number of years, and yet we've had just 3 years in a row of 4% increases for the deputies because of the union negotiations. So all of that sounds good, but the practicality when it actually goes into play doesn't work out because you don't have enough resources to consume to pay all those extra wages at time and a half. The matter of the posse, I'm not opposed to the posse, but we do have a reserve academy and a reserve contingent of law enforcement officers. And the reserve program is based on the criteria set down by the Criminal Justice Training Commission of Olympia, or in Bureau. There's a reason why the reserves have to go through this extensive academy course to get themselves certified. So if we were to use posse, I think the best use of posse would be in a search and rescue or auxiliary to that group that is also already in play. But to put them into a role of traditional auxiliary to the deputies or to the sheriff in a law enforcement capacity is very risky because of all of the inherent liability that is involved in law enforcement function, and all different laws and rules that govern arrests and so on and so forth. So I like the idea of the posse. I just think that the posse would have to be employed in more of a civic function as in search and rescue. The aircraft. We are already using an aircraft that's volunteered to come over and assist with search and rescue, so that's not a new concept. That's something that's already being replayed. I waved to the pilot at one of the more recent search and rescue operations that we had out here on the Clinton Tap. I guess I can't recall all the different points that were made, but those are some of them that I recall, so I can address those.
Any other questions?
I heard you addressing Republicans in the room when I came in, and I'm not one. What does the politics have to do with the sheriff's department?
This forum is being sponsored by the Republican Party, So if you're,
No, it was not.
I beg your pardon.
That's not.
Okay, my mistake. Okay.
But my question still stands. I'd like to know what politics has to do with the sheriff's operation.
Very little. As a matter of fact, I'd like to see it be a nonpartisan, just like the judges are, but this is the way that the system's been set up and I'm stuck with it. So I align myself most closely with the Republican Party, and that's what came up. We've had some other discussions that were sponsored by the Republican Party, and I apologize for that.
Well, that's all right, but I have, it seems like I've read statements that sounded like it would be affecting your choices in management. I guess I want that clarified.
No, I think you made a inaccurate conclusion there.
Okay.
Bob?
Thanks. Let me answer you directly. In my opinion, you call 911, you are not going to be asked whether you're a Democrat, a Republican, or an independent. I will send you a deputy. Really, the sheriff's, and Mark's right in one respect here. There's a lot of reasons it probably should be a nonpartisan, but it's not. It is what it is. And we both are on the Republican ticket, Second Amendment wise. But I can assure you that all citizens will be treated equal as far as service, regardless of their political position.
So what do you mean when you say your Second Amendment guys?
Well, I believe strongly in the right to bear arms.
And will that affect any operation of the sheriff's department?
It shouldn't. It shouldn't.
So somewhat in the same light, so both candidates are Republicans. It's a primary, and the top two go to the November election. So what's going to happen